Well, first of all, welcome everybody to Real Debate number 7, would you believe? And I'm pleased to have David Newman. David, you're very welcome.
Good morning, Ian, and hi, Dan. Nice to be with you.
And we've got Dan Evans, who I think most people know by now. But David, pleasure to welcome you. Part of the reason for wanting to invite you is that you've just published a book called Everything is Connected, which is a very well researched and thought-provoking book. And it looks at the challenge we have as a society and tracks money as the sort of driving force that's fueling climate change and the impact that this is having on the environment and society as a whole. You know, you've had a very interesting background working for organizations like Greenpeace and government agencies. And I know you have other responsibilities as managing director of BIBA, which is the Biobased Biodegradable Industries Association, and also the European Circular Economy Policy, ECBPI, is that right?
Yeah, I love acronyms, don't I? Complicated. It's policy initiative on the circular economy, yes.
You're very welcome. Now, I always start off with this question just to break the ice. So what do you like doing when you're not trying to change behavior of government and organizations around the world? What are your interests?
Well, you know, to overcome the frustrations of failing to change those governments and organizations quickly enough, you need to have other interests, otherwise it will drive you bananas. And I do, you know, a lot of outdoor activity, a lot of walking, and I walk every day. You know, even here in the city of London where I live, I walk every day at least an hour, and at weekends at least half the day, every day. And when I'm on holiday, you know, at least 10 miles a day. So, and walking is wonderful because it not only exercises the body, but it exercises the brain and oxygenates the brain. And, you know, friends of mine will know that at 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning, I'm calling them up because I'm halfway into a walk and I've got some brilliant idea and they're still asleep. So if you want to sleep on Sunday morning, don't give me your phone number. And
topic, David, actually, it's been recently proven that walking requires you getting bright ideas.
Yeah, I also have bright ideas under the shower, but we're not going down that route right now. And
I take it you don't have a dog to assist you with the walking or the pulling, should I say?
No, the funny thing about having a dog, and I have had a dog, is that actually it slows you down because the dog, of course, you know, wants to sniff the lamppost and sniff every other dog, and so it's not enjoyable anymore. The other thing, of course, you know, I do a lot of is I read a lot. I think I got through 10 books so far this summer, and my wife and I, you know, watch occasional films or comedy, but I'm not a great TV fan. I watch very little TV.
Good stuff. Well, look, I know that Dan's got a question for you, so go on, Dan, shoot.
Well, you're a guy who likes to push the envelope. So what sort of initiatives have you pushed through in the past and which you're most proud of and why?
Well, you know, I'm an old man, so I've done a lot, and you know, I've done a lot, not because I'm a genius, but because a lot of years has passed. And when I first started off doing my environmental work back in the late 1980s, I worked with the man who was one of the founders of the Greenpeace organization, a charismatic, chain-smoking alcoholic by the name of David McTaggart.
I remember him.
Yeah, the guy who went against the French nuclear bomb in Mururoa and sort of single-handed put an end to atmospheric nuclear testing. So an absolutely amazing character. And I worked with him for 13 years. And in those early years, I understood about environmental campaigning about as much as I understand now about flying to Mars. You know, so I learned everything from him. And I played a tiny part in ending commercial whaling. I mean, that was a little bit of research activity I did at the time. I was an insignificant part of that, but I was very proud to have given a little contribution. I played a reasonable part in bringing in a moratorium on nuclear testing into force. And I know North Korea still doesn't respect that moratorium, but every other country does. And I'm proud of that because actually that made the world a safer place to be in. And bringing that moratorium into force in 1996 was, I think, a great success for the international community, and I played a role in that. And when my Greenpeace days 1 or 2, I got a UNESCO award for helping to stop the pollution from the production of PVC into the Venice Lagoon, where it was a huge problem with dioxin pollution, and then over the years since leaving Greenpeace, and the one thing I'm really proud of is the whole food waste system, which I helped set up in Italy, and made Italy a leader in food waste. Excuse the banging noise here. I live near a big building site, but helped make the Italian food waste system the best in the world. And throughout the EU plus the UK, Italy treats half of all the food waste.
Wow.
Collected and treated today in EU plus the UK. Okay, so South Korea is the only country in the world which does it better, and that's despite the bottom part of Italy still being half in the third world and not doing it at all, which means that the sort of central northern parts of Italy really do a fantastic job. And I did all the laws to help set all that up, and I'm very proud of that, because the whole food waste collection system in Italy actually contributed over the reporting period around 13% of all Italy's greenhouse gas reductions. So that's significant it is. So when you say, what do you do for the environment, food waste collections, I go, yeah, really? Actually, yes, really, it's very important.
Compare that, say, to the UK, where our food waste collection stands at what sort of percentage of waste collection?
Well, in Italy, I like to look at per capita interception. In Italy, they are roughly at about 100 kilos per capita per annum. In England, I think we're somewhere in the region of 10 to 15, and in the rest of the UK, somewhere in the region of 20 to 25.
So we have a long way to go.
Wales is a little bit higher. And we have, roughly in Italy, 6 million tonnes of food waste going into anaerobic digestion and composting. In England, less than 800,000 tonnes.
And why do you think that has not taken hold in the UK? What is it about the UK infrastructure that's stopping us to take food waste collection more seriously?
Yeah, this has nothing to do with infrastructure or technology, Ian. This is simply to do with legislation. Italy made a point in the noughties, in the first decade after 2000, of not allowing a massive spread of incineration, and at the same time giving local authorities a 65% recycling target from 2006. So 15 years ago, we've just got that 65% target here today. So you have to meet the 65% target, and you weren't allowed to indiscriminately build and burn, as we have done in the UK. And that comes down to government policy. A lot of it comes down to austerity. We had the George Osborne austerity years in which local councils were starved of funding, and that stopped them setting up innovative collection schemes, but also meant that the big waste companies were able to convince the councils that their future laid in just putting everything in a black bag and incinerating it. They've done a very successful job on that. Now, the good news is that people like me and others campaigned for food waste collections to be mandated in the UK, and that has been a successful campaign. So in post-2023, every household and every small business across the UK will have a service to provide separate food waste collection by law. Now, there's a big argument, therefore, about the quality of the service. What are the parameters? Whether there should be a benchmark. Is 100 kilos the benchmark? Is it 50 kilos per person? What is the benchmark? Does offering the service like you have in Scotland mean simply offering it but not actually forcing you to take it up? So you only have 20% interception of food waste? These are all questions which have yet to be sorted out, and they will be sorted out because we're not completely stupid. But the good news is that in 2 or 3 years' time, we will have food waste collections more widely right across the nation.
We'll talk about compostability in a minute, and the challenges of things like flexibles, etc. But before we get on to that, I'd like to ask you a bit about your recently published book, Everything is Connected. First of all, what inspired you to write the book, and what's the purpose of this book? And once people have read it, what are you hoping is going to motivate them to change? How is it going to motivate them to change in some way?
Well, there's a lot of questions there, Ian. Firstly, thanks for having been one of the few who read it. It's now a year since it was published. And it's an ebook. So, and the reason it's an ebook is because it is an encyclopedia of information. It's actually easier to read it on an iPad or on a computer, where you can click through to the links which give you the sources and the deeper story behind the few lines that I write in the book.
Fact check it on the fly, essentially.
Yeah, check it on the fly and find out, because a book is a moment in time, isn't it? And as I said when I was writing the chapter on climate change, any of the data you see here, by the time you read it, will be out of date. And so, clicking through the links, you can find the up-to-date data. It's the narrative which is important rather than the specific moment in time data. So that's part of the reason why it's an ebook. And what inspired me to write it was that so many people have said to me over my years, "What do you do?" Sometimes. So I think, what do I do actually? So I thought, well, I try to, weave in a little bit of my 30 years of experience with where we are in the world to sort of give an answer about what I do, why I do what I do. And I hope that the inspiration of the book is that we have a whole new generation of young people who are activists, as I have been. And the book is dedicated to all those future activists who will go out and campaign for a cleaner, greener, fairer world. And also to help people understand that, contrary to what you are led to believe, the barriers to change are not technology, are not human behavior, but are policies and finance.
Yeah, you actually mentioned that money is essentially the driving force behind policy, legislation, material supply, political and social views. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Well, if you've got $1 million and I've got none, I'm going to want some of that and you're not going to want to give any of it to me. And essentially, that's how the economy works. Those who have the money and the money to buy the resources try to keep them, monopolize them, centralize them, and sell them or use them for their own profit. Now, profit is great. We need profit. You can't run a business without profit. You can't give shareholders back their money. You can't give bonuses to your staff. You can't invest in the future. You can't have a pot for the rainy day unless you make some profit. Great. No argument about that. But making profit through the wholesale destruction of the environment in which we live is not only stupid, but it's stupid in the sense that long term it can't continue. But it's counterproductive. I mean, when you've cut down every last tree, you've raised every last inch of topsoil from the ground, you've emptied the oceans of every last fish. Are you going to eat your gold? Are you going to eat your diamonds? And so, long term, it's really stupid that the profit motive drives destruction, because it's going to destroy the businesses.
So when it comes to those things affecting policy and legislation, government-related things, how can we stop that? Well,
there's several ways in which, of course, it influences government, and you've seen just recently with the £250,000 fee that you have to pay to Ben Elliott to get access to the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer. So money influences government. By having it, you're able to buy access, and that's been true forever. That's not just true today. And that's how American politics works. That's why in Washington there are thousands of lobbyists, all earning fortunes paid by the oil companies, etc. They access politicians and they influence politicians. They pay politicians. In America, it's legal to actually pay politicians. And so, that is where money directly influences policy makers. But money allows companies like ExxonMobil to have, massive global campaigns showing how they're making energy out of seaweed, when actually we all know that that's a laboratory scale experiment which has absolutely no industrial reality whatsoever. And it's just a way of making you feel good about using petrol, to make you feel good about the petrol companies, because they make you feel that that they are behind the solution, that they are not the problem, they are the solution. So,
products funds the solution by proxy.
Yeah, money. So money, money influences the policymakers, and money influences the mentality. Money makes people believe that the way in which money is used at the moment is part of the solution rather than the problem.
So if we have all these rich companies essentially buying access to politicians and in some shade of grey bribing them, what can we do then? How can we continue that?
Okay, well, I think if you go to the last chapter in my book, and the last chapter sort of really tries to sum it up, and that is that activism and political democracy are really our bastions against these systems. And if you go to the first chapter in my book, you will see many, many examples of where activism and political democracy has worked. We are in a mess, but we would have been in a far bigger mess had there not been people around like David McTaggart and my own little contribution over the last 30 years to making our life better. We forget that we solved the ozone layer problem. That,
CFCs.
That was down to activism and to democracy and to companies and governments working together, but being forced to work together. And, acid rains, sulfur emissions from our power plants, and lead in petrol, and wiping out the whale population, and so on and so on. There's so many things that actually have been achieved through activism. Our hope lies in that, and our hope lies in defending the democratic systems which we have and reinforcing them so that they are a bastion against the corruption, a bastion against the money, a bastion against the interests who only have profit as their goal.
So without opening, sorry, Ian, back on.
I was going to say, so how do investors, leading investors, value risk? We hear about triple bottom line, measuring not just profitability, but also impacts on planet and people, society. Do you think we'll ever see a time when companies' success will be measured more holistically and not just against bottom line profitability?
I think I quote Niels Bohr, the Nobel Prize winner in the book here, in which, like Yogi Berra says, making predictions is difficult, especially if they're about the future. So I don't have a crystal ball. But you know what? I think change is happening far, far faster than we understand. And the change in culture has been very, very quick. Now, to transfer that change in culture into change in actions is harder. I did a webinar some weeks ago with the Environment Protection Agency and the CEO of Occidental Petroleum, down in the Texas Permian Basin. And I said to her, your worst nightmare is that we actually have a global carbon price. And she said, well, David, actually, we want a global carbon price because people like us know that without a global carbon price, we're not going to have, for example, carbon capture systems. It's $120 a ton to capture carbon. The carbon price at the moment is around 60. So we're halfway there. And when investors start to understand that they have to account for their carbon footprint as an economic cost, financial cost, you will see that probably every major corporation in the world is losing money.
So that's how you think you're going to convert the big polluters is with the carbon cost?
I think is, Dan. I think that the emissions trading system has come into force now again in Europe. The carbon price is $60, 60 euros a ton. A system has come into place here in the UK. China has its own system. I think something like a quarter of all emissions around the world are now governed by carbon trading systems. And the carbon price is around about $60 a ton. And it's going up. See Bloomberg yesterday. It's heading, they reckon, to $100 a ton by 2025. Now, at $100 a ton, you start to change things. The question is, where where the jurisdictions are and where the carbon price is actually applied. For example, in Europe, it's not applied to incineration. So, you burn waste and you get a free carbon ride on it. That's just obscene to me. It's unethical and it's obscene. If the United States doesn't enforce a carbon price, like, for example, Canada does, are you going to get environmental dumping across the border between Canada and the United States? Because one company is trading at $100 a ton more cheaply than another company. You have to have the jurisdictions right, and you have to have the industries covered. And I think it's not so far away. And I think that if COP26 does any one significant thing, apart from getting the Article 6 right, which is on the aid to developing countries, if they get a motion through that countries will investigate global carbon pricing by, say, 2030, well, that would be a huge step.
But measuring carbon is quite difficult, isn't it? Putting together a life cycle analysis of any product or process is a complicated business. It's an expensive business.
Yes, but if you were just to take it on your own energy consumption as a company, that's actually very straightforward. Simply that.
But offsetting, a lot of companies will adopt offsetting as a quick fix. But is that actually an answer?
I think that the judgment is still out on that, Ian, and I tend to believe that is not an answer. Emitting carbon today in the belief that a tree over 100 years will soak it back up is a bit of a soft sell to me, and I can't see that that's the solution to the problems we have today.
Yeah, I've got to agree on that. I've kind of been a bit of a skeptic when companies said, okay, we've planted 10,000 trees or whatever, so we're green now. Okay, so you show proof of that.
Yeah, and will the trees be around in 100 years' time? Will they have been cut down in 10? Exactly. And how many of them will have died and such like? So I think that's a discussion we can have. But listen, that's not going to solve our problems short term, and we don't have any more time to lose on these sort of solutions. We have to act very, very fast.
How long do you think we've got? In terms of turning the ship round?
No, I think that we've gone past tipping points. The IPCC report said it this last month. My book said it last year. Stern report said it in 2006. David McTaggart said it in 1995. President Johnson got the report from the Scientific Council of the United States in 1967. Edward Teller said it in 1953. How many more times do we need to say?
I mean, you mentioned in a post the other day I read that stop the scientific reports trying to prove we have a problem with climate change. Let's now just get on and practically fix these things.
Yeah, I meant yeah, exactly. I meant it as a provocation here, and we of course we need the science, we need the updates. Yeah. But I'm sort of sick to death of people saying we need more evidence.
We have the evidence.
How much evidence do you need? Essentially, every single scientist worth their weight will tell you climate change is a thing. And, these scientists, they're not just someone who read Wikipedia, or read this study or that study. They've spent their lives studying these exact things. If you have people saying, oh, what do you know? Some person who does just some odd bod job, watches the TV, doesn't do anything specific, thinks that they know everything about climate change, versus someone who's literally spent 30, 40 years just studying that, nothing else, just climate change. And people still say, where's the evidence?
But the IPCC report is really interesting because people don't understand, and I try to explain the process in the book, that anything that comes out from a United Nations organization has, by the rules of the United Nations, to be totally 100% consensual. There is total 100% unanimity. Otherwise, the report isn't published. So that means that all the climate change skeptic countries, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela.
Of course, Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, all have their scientists in there, all writing that report and have all signed off on it. Now, what that means is that actually that report is not worst case scenario. That report actually is best case scenario because they've done their goddamn best to water it down.
Yeah.
So we should be very worried.
Absolutely.
But getting countries like China and the US all on the same page is politically a huge challenge, isn't it? To try and align everybody so that we're working to the same end goal to reduce carbon outputs and to have a infrastructure that measures fairly the value of carbon, whether it's produced in China or whether it's produced in the UK, is a huge challenge, isn't it?
Listen, if it was simple, Ian, we wouldn't be where we are. And we're in a mess because it is difficult. We're in a mess because we don't also morally, as an industrialized world, have one foot to stand on. Because we've been emitting carbon for the last 200 years as if it was not a problem, and now we're telling China and India and developing countries not to do what we've done for the last 2 centuries. So there's also the Indians. I'm an official observer to the COP process, and I've been for the last dozen years, and the Indians will always stand up and say, it's all very well, you saying that we should build coal-fired power plants. You taught us how to build them, and by the way, our emissions per capita are around about 5 or 10% of your emissions per capita still today. So who the hell are you to teach us what to do? And they have a point, and the point also being that without energy you don't get either economic growth or security, and you also don't give the opportunity for the development of human beings. Think of, you need energy for education. You need to be able to read in the dark. You need to be able to go to school. You need a hospital with energy to keep people healthy. So the development of energy and the development of human beings to their full potential are two things which are intrinsically linked. So you cannot deny developing countries the best opportunities that they have to meet their energy goals. What you have to do is to make it as advantageous as possible for them to meet their energy goals without carbon emissions. Now, we've virtually got solar and wind power down to the lowest cost of coal per kilowatt hour. But it's still damned attractive to have a centralized, 10 megawatt, 20 megawatt, 30 megawatt coal plant that feeds hundreds of thousands of people, rather than having to put solar panels on everybody's roof, or and what you do during the monsoon season, and what you do when the wind doesn't blow. It's still a very, very attractive proposition. And of course, because it is a very capital intensive proposition, again, it's in the hands of the big industries. Again, it's a very attractive proposition to politicians. They can all live off this.
What sort of legislation do you think they could push in the next 5-10 years then to try and reverse the tide on climate change and the environment, the destruction of the environment?
So I'd like to see 2 or 3 things done. Firstly, I would like to make it obligatory that all stock exchange registered companies in wherever the stock exchange is have to put into their balance sheets their carbon emissions at today's carbon prices. And were you to do that, you would see that almost all of them are losing money. There would be no shareholder value, there would be no dividends, their share price would collapse. It would force them to dramatically change the way in which they do business.
How viable do you think that would be in 5 years?
Listen, I think if any major shareholder of a major company is listening to this, they would be sending out a hit squad.
Bye, David. Nice to know you.
They wouldn't want this. No, but in a sense that it's probably not going to happen. It could happen perhaps in the EU, but I don't think it's going to happen short term. But I would like to see that. The other thing, of course, is a carbon price, and is a realistic carbon price, and that is happening. And I think that probably a 5 to 10 year horizon for that to be almost global is not beyond the boundaries of a possibility. It's possible.
Isn't fundamentally one of the issues, particularly in the West, where our appetite for consumption is now almost out of control, that we're so used to just buying what we want, when we want, how we want, that our appetite for just consuming is
Convenient.
it's almost like an addiction.
WWF do a test which you can do as an individual on their website. I can't remember what it's called, but anyway, basically the test says, are you living within the world's resource boundaries? You know, you as an individual. So, you know, have you got a car? How many airplanes do you take? How many trains do you take? Do you eat meat? How many clothes did you buy this year, et cetera, et cetera? Well, you know, during the 18 months of the pandemic, all those answers have been, for me personally, been no, I don't have a car, I haven't taken an aeroplane since January 2020, I eat meat once a week, blah, blah, blah. I haven't bought a new pair of clothes, because a new pair of shoes or any clothes since 2019. We haven't needed them, have we? You know?
No.
So, you know, all these things I don't do that I used to do. I am at 98%, and I haven't bought anything. Now that shows you how goddamn difficult it is to be within your boundaries as a citizen, your resource boundaries in today's society. And of course, those resource boundaries don't get bigger; they get smaller as we are more people on the planet, and as there are less resources to be exploited. So my 98% today, and probably in a year's time, will be 105 or 110%. So what that means is that despite being a virtually non-consuming human being, I'm at the limits of what the world can tolerate from my presence. Now imagine a 25-year-old who's just got his first job and has just got his first salary and wants to go out and buy all those things that they were never able to buy before because mum and dad didn't give them the pocket money, or they were a student, they were broke. I mean, you know, it's there at 500% immediately. And I sort of have sympathy with them because we've all been through it, haven't we?
Yeah.
Well, we, as a society, certainly in the West, we measure success by how much stuff you've got, don't we? You know, and there's a fundamental, you know, happiness and contentment is closely linked to stuff, sadly.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
to spend weekends in.
I know that's a very, very deep topic.
No, I was thinking about this question for this interview, and I sort of thought, well, you know, should we go into the question of happiness and contentedness? But it's clear that the model we've got is not making us happy. You can see this through the drug abuse that there is, the alcoholism there is, the violence which there is between people in their own household, the violence there is on the streets, the rejection of our society, which such a big part of our society has. And an article I published in the Green Party newspaper magazine just a few months ago was about Jimmy Reed's famous speech. Jimmy Reed was the Clydeside shipbuilders trade union leader who was made in 1973. He was made the provost of Glasgow University, and he gave this amazing speech, one of the only speeches the New York Times has ever published in full, about alienation. And alienation is a Marxist theory of how we are alienated from the society we live in. And I firmly believe that this whole consumption pattern has alienated us from each other, from the nature which surrounds us, from our greater well-being. You only have to see that in obesity. People killing themselves through consumption.
And that's not even an opinion, that's extremely well understood scientifically.
Yeah, and so we are somehow or the other not only destroying the environment we live in through all of this, killing ourselves, we are completely detached from the reality of our world, and we are unhappy as a result of it. Go figure.
What kind of gets me is I live in a town that wants to be a city desperately, and its population is going up and up. More and more new houses are going up. Green spaces are going down. Now, studies have found that the higher the population density, the more depression there is, the more suicide there is, the more poverty there is, the fewer green spaces we have, the more stress we have, the more depression we have. And these are all really well-established facts, yet governments are doing it anyway. I thought the governments were here to serve us, the people. So just keep your people happy first before you start trying to cram more people in. Like, we have to look at happiness as a nation, and how to keep us happy.
Yeah, I think that, you know, one of the concluding remarks in my book was, ask your politicians what they want, what they are there for. And if the politician says we're there to promote business and we're there to make our economy drive forward, don't trust them one bloody bit.
I hear that. I hear that.
If the politician says, I'm here to serve your health, I'm here to make sure that you live in a healthy society and that you are healthy yourselves, and I will do my best for your health and your family's health, well, then you think, okay, he's not about driving some agenda which is around third-party wealth, is around somebody else's profit. He's actually thinking about my well-being. Governments don't.
You know, that's
that way.
Very.
They're not measured by. They're not measured by some sort of happiness scale, are they?
Well, unless you go to Bhutan, I think Bhutan has a not a GDP but a global happiness scale.
That's the way.
In Bhutan.
I think so.
Maybe. Well, David, it is always fascinating to listen to you. I've got one final question, and that is, and you know what it's going to be, your favorite book. First of all, what are you reading right now? I know you've got a few books that are on your list, but what are you reading right now? And what book has had the most impact on you and why?
I'm reading Bill Bryson's book on the body.
Okay.
And it's, you know, Bill Bryson is quite a funny writer. This I'm finding a little bit hard going, actually, because it's a little bit more scientific than my tiny brain can take. But
your tiny brain, yeah.
It's interesting because, you know, he talks about the body in his sort of wry, semi-comical way, but in a way that tries to make a layman like me understand it. And listen, I just read, the last book I read was last week, and this is, I suppose as you get older, you go back to things. And one of the most extraordinary books I've ever read, and please, everybody go out and buy it, is W.G. Siebold's Austerlitz.
How do you spell that?
Austerlitz as in the Battle of Austerlitz. Austerlitz with a Z at the end. W.G. Siebold. And he, unfortunately, he died in 51 years of age. He was a teacher of literature at East Anglia University, a German immigrant into our country, and Austerlitz is an immense work. It's not a long book, but it's an immense work. I'm not going to spoil the story for you, but I think of all the stories that I go back to, that War and Peace is another immense, detailed story which I go back to time and time again when I run out of things to read. Pick up War and Peace. God, there's another piece I didn't remember in that, you know. But Austerlitz really is undoubtedly one of a book of monumental brilliance.
As Dan knows, the one book I always recommend to people if they haven't read it. Have you read this one, The Third Plate by Dan Barber?
No.
Great book. You love it. It's all about.
You trying to get a sponsorship, Ian?
I should really, shouldn't I? I've never met this guy, but
Ian's on commission from Dan Barber, I think.
He's an American chef.
Okay.
Writer. He's got a couple of restaurants up in the States, but he talks about food,
yeah,
and the whole impact of the supply chain and farming practices going back to the start of the Industrial Revolution.
Well, one of the reasons perhaps I haven't read that, I read recently Michael Pollan's The Omnivore's Dilemma, which was written many years ago.
Yeah, I've got that. Yeah.
Okay, and that's the same sort of story, and that's an astonishing book as well, but you know, about the American food system, and an eye opener on organic food as well for me. But you know what? I try not to read things which are in any way too closely attached to what I do.
Escapism, huh?
You just become boring, don't you?
I think that's why I still read so much medical stuff, is because I do so much research on packaging. You can become a bit burnt out and somewhat desensitized. So let's look at biology and chemistry again. And you're just dissociated, you kind of reset, don't you? So when you go back to your trade, you're interested again.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very important.
Well, look, David, thank you for your time. What are you up to today? Where are you off now?
Well, I'm here in my home office, writing emails, making phone calls, pestering people. But it's a quiet period of time. It's the middle of August, isn't it? And the whole of Europe is on holiday. and many people here in the UK are on holidays, so there's not a lot of people going to be pestered today.
Well, look, enjoy the rest of your summer. Thank you so much for your time. Inspiring as always. Keep well.
Thank you both
Yeah,
very
David,
much
thank
for the
you so much.
opportunity.